Morning, good afternoon to everyone, depending on the time zone where you are in, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Richa, and I work as Education Support Manager at ACCA. So our session today is designed to support you with strategic business leader paper, as you already know. And here our expert will take you through the latest examiner report, the latest changes which are coming in terms of the pre-seen document for SBL, and sharing his brief insights and tips about the upcoming September 23 exams, and also answering your questions live. So I'm very pleased to be joined by our expert tutor, Ashim Kumar. Before I hand over to Ashim, I would quickly like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, there are a number of buttons you can use. There is a help icon on the left, which provides resources and information to help you resolve any technical issues you might experience. Icons for the slides and media player, you will need to see both of these during the webinar, so make sure you have selected them. There is a attendee chat function also, so you can engage with fellow webinar attendees. That's the icon on the right side. There is a resource list, which is a file-like symbol. So that really contains a lot of information, a lot of resources for you, which are very much relevant to today's session, today's paper, and your exam. So you can rearrange your screen to suit you and resize the windows if you need to. And if I'm saying of resizing the windows, I would also mention that in between the session, we would also be sharing our screens live screens as well. So you may need to resize the media player window for yourself. And at any point, if you are not able to hear what we are saying or you cannot see any visuals, please do refresh your browser or log in again. So registering for this webinar, that means you will be sent an email tomorrow with details of how you can listen to it again. So don't worry at all. If you miss something or you have any technical issues, you will be able to watch the recording as well. I'm going to hand over to Ashim in a moment and we'll be back with you towards the end of the session. In the meantime, during the session, if you want to ask any questions, anything from ACCA related to your paper specifically, and Ashim also. So please click on Q&A button, which is the middle icon at the bottom of your screen. Please note, we cannot guarantee responding to everyone directly, either verbally or via web chat, but we hope that questions we share will be helpful to everyone. So with this, Ashim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Richa, and hello and welcome to all of you who've taken the time to join us today. We're together for an hour and we do have quite a lot to cover, but we will do our best to be as efficient as possible with our time. I'd just like to reiterate before we start that if you have any questions, please don't be shy. Make a note of them in the Q&A. Okay, it really helps us also to kind of focus on the areas that are causing the biggest challenges so that we can resolve them while we're here together. Okay, so don't be shy. Write the questions in. And it may be that I answer some of these later on after you've written the questions. Later on in my presentation. But if I haven't, then I'll deal with them at the end. Okay, so let's get started. Who am I? Well, some of you may have come across me before. I do work with the ACCA quite a lot, so you may well have seen some of my earlier recordings. I'm an ACCA and I'm an MBA in international business. I've been teaching ACCA for over 30 years, which actually the reason I mention it is because over that time, I taught performance management, for example, financial management and advanced performance management and even law at the beginning of my career. So that kind of experience has proved to be extremely useful for teaching SBL, because with SBL, one needs a holistic approach when creating your answers. You need to understand the PM or the FM or the even legal sometimes implications of the situation and be able to address them. Okay, so I found that has been very helpful for me and for me to support students to think in a similar way. As I've already said, I do quite a lot of work for the ACCA, but my background isn't purely in teaching. It's not academic as such. I've also had hands-on experience of running international businesses, one in Central Eastern Europe, one in Middle East and North Africa. And as a result of that, I've been able to combine the theoretical, inverted commas, because it's not really theoretical, but and hands-on experience and I bring that to my SBL teaching. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, as we all know, SBL exam is changing in from the September sitting, just less than a month away. All right, the structure will be different, and I know that that's caused many candidates, many students, some kind of concern, some worry. So really, I want to kind of go through those changes and kind of allay any fears that you may have, because actually they're not too bad, as you'll see in just a minute. We'll have a quick look at a previous examiner's report, in fact, the latest examiner's report, and I'll run through some of those issues, and we'll see that actually the issues that the examiner raises in this report are very similar to previous ones. And then we'll have a look at the pre-September 2023 mock, which incidentally I will be doing a review of on Monday, on the 14th. But I'll come back to that later on. And then at the end, as I've already said, we'll do a live Q&A. Okay, so that's the plan. So let's get down to it. What are the key changes? Well, here you see pre-September 23 and post-September 23. The exam duration has gone down from 4 hours to 3 hours, 15 minutes. Now, the reason for that, well, there are a number of reasons, but the main one is really to bring SBL in line with the other examinations at strategic professional stage, okay, which are all also 3 hours and 15 minutes long. So the reason that SBL required or was allocated 4 hours, has been allocated 4 hours in the past, is because the amount of information that has been necessary for candidates to read and understand and absorb and then apply in the answers. So to make the exam shorter, the ACCA have taken out a lot of that information and put them into the pre-seen case study, which is released 2 weeks before the exam itself. And we'll be talking about that in detail in just a second. But that's how it's been done, okay? Now, in every SBL examination, you have what are called exhibits. And these exhibits, as I've just explained, used to be lots of them, okay? There are other sources of information, such as, I don't know, emails or board minutes or, I don't know, media articles. All of these might be included in the exhibits. So when the structure was changed, much of this was taken out of the examination and put into the pre-seen. So it's actually made the exhibits fewer and shorter, okay? So that's another way in which the whole exam has been shortened. Pre-seen case study, I've just talked about that. I've mentioned what that is, okay? And we'll go into it in more detail in just a second. Let's move on to the number of tasks. In the past, the ACCA never committed to a specific number of tasks or indeed a specific number of exhibits. However, from September, there will be 3 tasks. Okay, now each task will have subtasks. So, for example, task number 2 will have a part A, B, and C, and so on. Right, but essentially there'll be 3 main tasks, which means 3 main, if you like, general topic areas. Okay, that will be examined. Professional skills. Now, this has also changed, and I'm actually quite in favour of this change. As most of you will know, with SBL, there are 5 professional skills, and each examination in the past has contributed, or 20% of the marks are contributed by the professional skills. Okay. So, for example, analysis is a professional skills, communication is a professional skill, and so on. And so in the past, what you used to find was that Each professional skill, typically, let's say it's 4 marks per skill, 20 marks in total, 5 professional skills. Each professional skill will carry 4 marks. So those 4 marks, let's say for the communication professional skill, might be divided across more than one task. So task 1A, you might have 2 communication skills, professional skills marks. And in task 3B, you might have the other 2 communication professional skills marks awarded, okay? With a new structure, the professional skill, each professional skill is tested only once, all right, with a task, and each time each professional skill carries the full 4 marks each time it's tested. All right, so you really need to, here's an opportunity, right, to really demonstrate in detail and convincingly that your answer is showing that professional skill. Okay, so professional skills is an area you need to feel extremely comfortable with. Response option. In the past, multiple tasks, one response option. So you had, for example, most of the answers in SBL would be presented on the word processor response option for SBL. And so you'd have one word processor, enormous document, and each of the tasks would be presented on one huge document. From September, each task will have its own separate response option, its own separate WP, all right, or its own separate slide response option if you're asked for slides. Okay, so you finish task 1, you answer it on the response options for task 1, you move on to task number 2, and you do the same for that, and then 3. Okay, so those are the main differences, the main changes. So how much difference does it make in terms of, is the exam easier as a result or not? Because I get asked this question a lot. And I suppose easier is something that, we each have our own definitions of. But let's go through what I like about the changes. Okay, so exam duration. The exam itself, actually writing the examination answers, there really is no difference. Why do I say that? Well, we have 3 hours and 15 minutes, right, to answer the SBL exam. 15 of those minutes will probably be used for planning purposes, which leaves us 3 hours to answer the examination itself. This was exactly what I recommended to students when the exam was 4 hours long, because I would recommend 1 hour for the reading and absorption of all the exhibits and this huge amount of information, right, that they had to go through, and then 3 hours for writing the answer to the exam. So in that sense, the duration hasn't changed. So if you're familiar with writing 3-hour examinations, okay, if you look at some of the previous videos on the approach to writing answers in SBL, that is the same. So you can rely on all of that guidance that is available on the ACCA, in the ACCA resources. So there's no difference. So we like that. We like also the fact that the exhibits are fewer, and therefore they're less confusing because there's much less information. I mean, it's tough enough in the exam, right? When you're stressed and you're trying to think, your mind's jumping around all over the place, and suddenly you get this huge deluge of information thrown at you, and you have to think, well, how much of this is relevant? How can I use it? How can I, all of that. The exhibits now are much shorter. Most of them, and you'll see in a minute, are just about one page long, right? Which is great. Just have the key information on each exhibit. And the nice thing is, with the new structure, that the exhibits are independent from one another. And what do I mean by that? Well, what that means is that in the previous structure, it was very easy to find the answer to a particular task in more than one exhibit, right? So the answer to task 2 might come from exhibits 3 and 4 and 5, for example, okay? With the new structure, they're much more independent. So most of the answer to any particular task will come from one particular exhibit. Okay, so we like that. It just streamlines our thinking. Preceding case study, we get this 2 weeks before the real exam, and that's great because it means we can really think about the context and the history of the organization and the industry, and then craft our answers in the examination in that context. That's really important, and we'll be talking more about that as well. Number of tasks, well, there's really no difference. I say no difference because, as I said earlier, although there are 3 main tasks, each task will have subtasks, so you may end up with a similar number of total questions. So in that sense, there's no difference to the old structure. Professional skills, again, I've said, professional skill, 4 marks each time, and therefore more opportunity. It's easier to earn, 2 or 3 marks out of 4 than, 1 mark out of, or 2 marks out of 2. And the response option, one response option per task, which is great because it does keep your answers independent. It does keep your mind focused on one task at a time. You don't, in the old structure, you kind of jumped back and forth. If all your answers were on one response option on one document, right, you tended to jump back and forth, and that's confusing. Here, one task, one response option, finish that, move on. Okay. Things that aren't so, easy. Well, there's less time for planning. Well, yeah, because we've only got about 15 minutes for planning in the new structure, and that's actually tough. Okay, but there is a way around it, and you'll find out more on that on Monday. So I hope you attend. Number of tasks, no difference, and must feel comfortable in how to earn professional skills marks. I think we've talked about that. What stays the same? Now, this is also important to remember. It's, the whole thing hasn't changed completely. We've already said the exam duration, the amount of time we spend on the exam hasn't changed. Okay, but other things that are worth mentioning. Number one, the syllabus hasn't changed, which is great. Okay, so the materials that we already have are still useful, including from ACCA resources. Integrated case study, yes. So what that means is that there's one case study which applies to all of the questions in the exam. All right, it's not as though you have one case study per task. That hasn't changed. Style and expectation of the exam. So everything that we've been talking about, or we will have come across in our preparation, in terms of how we present our answers, how the questions will be asked, what the examiner expects from our answers, and so on. That hasn't changed. 80%, 20% is a split of marks between technical and professional skills. That hasn't changed. Quality, integrity, and rigor, same thing. Okay, standards have not been reduced, so be aware of that. Exam answering techniques, and as I've said already, these are key areas that I strongly recommend. Planning, okay, and that planning is planning from the pre-scene, but also the planning we do in our 15 minutes at the beginning of the exam, 3 hours to answer the questions, same as before, 1.8 minutes per mark, which is my recommendation, which means that for each point that we make, okay, we assume that that point is going to attract 2 marks, which means that we spend 3.5 minutes, 3.6 minutes, making each point. Now, why do I say 2 marks per point? Well, if you look at the marking guide for most of the past examinations, you'll find that the marking guide says up to 2 marks for points made. Up to 2 marks per point made, right? And when you look at how those 2 marks are earned, right, you find that it's the state, explain, apply approach. State your point, explain your point, and then apply it to the organization, apply it to the challenge that is being faced. All right? So that hasn't changed. The structure, the approach to making our points hasn't changed. The time we spend on making each point hasn't changed. Number of marks per point hasn't changed. Okay, and the so what is critical. So what is basically when you write each point, and this takes some practice, I'd recommend it strongly. when you write each point, imagine that you're a member of the board of directors, all right, and somebody has just made this point to you, okay, and you ask yourself, well, okay, I've been told this, but so what? How does this help me solve my problem? So what? Okay, so if somebody stands in front of you and says, by the way, you've got a new competitor in the marketplace, and you say, well, I'm sitting on the board of directors. I know I have a new competitor on the marketplace. I want to know what to do about it, right? That's the so what. Okay, so what? Giving information is not enough. Making recommendations is what the board of directors wants from your answer. Okay, so very important. So there's lots of material actually on the ACCA's Study Hub, and I'll get back to that in a minute. All right, where you can listen to more deeper explanations of those areas. Now, I just want to show you very quickly. I'll share my screen with you. I'll show you very quickly what the exam looks like on the TestReach platform. So hopefully you're all able to see this now. Okay. Now, here on the left-hand side, we see 4 exhibits. Okay, so a limited number of exhibits. And just to give you an idea what the exhibits look like, in this one, the exhibit is a contract. It's about a contract with a potential customer. Okay, and here is an email from the Human Resources Director. So an exhibit could take all sorts of forms, but notice that these are short exhibits. And the reasons for that, well, we've already discussed. Okay, so the exhibits on the left, we have access to the pre-scene. Now, the pre-scene is available, of course, to us in the examination, and it's important. But please do not ignore the pre-scene. Say, oh, don't worry, I'll look it up in the exam. Okay, don't ignore it until you get to the exam, because the pre-scene is really there for specific uses. You don't have time to make the points you need to make in the exam and read through the pre-scene at the same time. You should have done that well before getting into the examination, but it's there as a backup. And then you see task number 1. There you go. All right, this one, 34 marks. Okay, it's got a part A, part B1. All right, B and B1. Okay, now notice what happens. Well, when we finished our answer to task 1, so there's our answer to task 1, for example. Okay, there you go. Okay, there it is. That's our answer. So we've done that. What next? Well, we press next, and there we go. We see the exhibits are the same, the pre-scene is the same, but now we have task number 2, and we can focus on answering task number 2. Okay, and you see we have a completely fresh response option on which to write our answers. Okay. So that's what the exam looks like. I hope that's clear. If it's still not clear, then please do make a note in the Q&A and we'll get back to it as soon as possible. Now, let's move on to the examiner's comments. And these come from June 2023, so the last sitting. I'm sorry to say that these are comments that the examiner repeats each time, which suggests that candidates aren't taking notice of them. So I strongly recommend that you do read the examiner's report in detail. All right, find out what the examiner is looking for and make sure that you give the examiner what is being looked for when you sit the exam. Makes sense, right? Give the examiner what is being looked for, you pass the exam. Simple as that. So don't ignore the examiner's report. I just want to highlight a couple of those. Time is kind of running along, so I need to be quick. One of the key things that the examiner always says is lack of development of the points made. So, for example, I'll stay with my simple competition illustration, right? So, for example, you might say in your answer, we have a large competitor in the marketplace, right? Now, well, okay, that's fine, but so what? That's fine, but you haven't added any value to that. All you have done is you've taken some data from the question and put it into your answer. That's not an answer, okay? Now, how do you develop that? Well, you develop it in this way. We have a new competitor in the marketplace. This risks our market share and profitability. This will have an impact on our stakeholders' expectations from us. Next, we therefore need a competitive strategy to strengthen our response to this competitor. I recommend that we follow a differentiation strategy, which means that we have a better quality product than our competitor. That is developing the point. Simply saying we have a new competitor means nothing and earns 0 marks. Remember, in SBL, it's not about repeating facts. It's not about repeating technical knowledge. It's about application of those facts, of the knowledge and commercial judgment to the facts. And that actually takes us to the second point, lack of application of the case scenario to the points made. Now, the thing I want to highlight here is that when you do your application, right, when you say, therefore, we need a competitive strategy, you need to do it specific to the organization in the case study. You can't just say, well, when you're facing competitive threat, you should, or company should have a competitive strategy, and there's a choice of, focus and cost leadership and differentiation, right? And each one of these means blah, blah, blah. That's a theoretical answer. It's not, being applied to the case study. And again, we'll earn 0 marks because the board of directors will say, well, I don't want to hear what's in your textbook. I want to know what I need to do. I want to know what I need to do about this competitor. All right? Wasting time by including irrelevant content. Yeah, so please don't just copy and paste from the tasks, from the exhibits, right, into your answer and think that that's your answer. It's not, right? And you've just wasted time doing it because you've earned 0 marks. Inappropriate use of models is another one that I want to focus on. Students have this feeling that, models are what SBL is about. It's not, okay? It is not about models. No one is going to ask you in SBL, what does Ansof's matrix say? Or what are the components of culture? Okay, does the board of directors care about the components of culture? No, they don't. Okay, remember in SBL, this is a practical examination. You approach it in a practical way, in a real world way. Okay, now in the real world, when you're faced with a challenge, what will you do? Well, you will use some commercial judgment, you will use some experience, you will use some technical knowledge. You might use, when you're communicating your solution to a problem, you might use some kind of framework to help structure your communication clearly, right? So you might decide, okay, well, I know what the problem is. We've got 5 products in our portfolio. 2 of them are in decline phase, right? 2 of them are stars, and one's a question mark, and one's a cash cow, right? So, or the other way, 6 products. So here we're talking BCG, right? BCG matrix. But you're not going to say to the board of directors, well, this is a star because blah, blah, blah. This is a cash cow because... You say, look, of these products, these two are in decline stage, which means that we need to make a decision about them. Are we going to try and rejuvenate them by investing in them, or are we going to kill off these dogs and reallocate the investment into, for example, products A and B, which are in a high growth market? Okay? So you're using the BCG matrix to communicate your solution, right? But you're not mentioning the BCG matrix. You're not explaining what a dog is and what a star is or what a cash cow. You're not doing that. So please don't do that. That's the first thing about models. Don't explain them. Second thing about models is that if students also think, well, if I'm going to use a model, I have to talk about every aspect of it, just to show off my memory. I know all the elements of Porter's five forces or Porter's diamond. I know all the elements. And so it's like saying, bargaining power suppliers. It means da 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 da. But in this case, as we don't have any suppliers, it's not relevant. Right? Now, if you write that down, the board of directors is going to say, well, if it's not relevant, why are you telling us about it? Why are you telling us? It's exactly the same in the exam. You use models, but you use them selectively. Use the components of the model which actually help support the point you're making. Don't just use them, parrot fashion for the sake of it. And again, this is one of the examples of why SBL is different. It's not a test of memory, it's a test of application. Okay? But unfortunately, students keep doing this. All right. And the other one is failing to read the task requirements carefully. I mean, read the question. It sounds obvious, right? But unfortunately, what tends to happen is we read, the first two words of a question. We think we know what we're being asked for. And we become very excited because we know the answer because we revised this last night. And we just write down everything we know. We do a brain dump, right, on that topic onto the response option. We've just wasted, 10, 15 minutes and earned 0 marks. Bad move, right? Let me give you an example. There's a question on integrated reporting. And a lot of students, what they did was they saw the words integrated reporting and immediately explained in detail what integrated reporting was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you read the question carefully, what it actually said was, tell the board of directors why integrated reporting is useful in our organization. In other words, it's not asking you to explain integrated reporting. It's asking you, is it a good idea for us? Does it help? Does it add value? If so, why? Different question. So everyone walks out of that exam thinking, oh, great, I wrote about integrated reporting, I'm such an expert. And they earn 0 marks and they wonder why. Because you weren't answering the question. So read the question carefully. That's one of the things you have to do in your planning. And again, I remind you, we'll talk about that on Monday. Okay, let's move on. I'll leave you to read the rest of it on your own. So how do we approach the new structure? All right, let's start with the pre-scene, the facts. We know why the ACCA is introduced it. We've talked about shortening the exam and providing the context in good time, 2 weeks before the exam. Now, this is what the ACCA says that we should do with the pre-scene. Number one, don't do an enormous amount of research on companies in that industry, okay? Everything you need to know about the industry and about the organization for its context, for its history, right, is in the pre-scene. Please, please, please don't do a PhD thesis on the industry in the pre-scene. Don't do that. Waste of time because you're not going to be asked about that. The aim of the pre-scene, and I repeat, please remember, the aim of the pre-scene is to give you a context of the organization so that when you create your recommendations in the examination, there is a match between the recommendation and the context of the. In other words, for example, if you're told that this is a small charity, you're told that in the pre-scene, right? And its income annually is $500,000 a year, or $500,000. In your recommendation in the exam, you're not going to suggest developing a strategy which costs $5 million to implement. You're not going to do that, right? So that's what I mean about making sure that the solutions you present in the examination are in the context of the pre-scene. It's about that. That's what it's about. It's not about being an expert on a particular industry. So don't waste time doing it. And also the ACCA says don't use this to question guess. Well, that's true. I mean, with SBL, you can't really question guess. All you can pretty much say with certainty is that most of the syllabus will be examined every time, right? Pretty much that strategy will always come up, risk will always come up, corporate governance will always come up in one way or another, okay? Stakeholders, regular, okay? But the nature of SBL is such that, there is no such thing as a unique answer to a particular question, because whatever solution you provide, you offer, will have implications for different parts of the business. So let's go back to the example with the competitive advantage, right? So you say, okay, we should do a differentiation strategy. Fine, great. Where's the money going to come from? Suddenly we're talking about access to finance, debt, our gearing ratio, the availability of finance to us. Will people lend it to us? Will we sell shares? So we're going to differentiate. How will our current customers respond to this? Will they like this or not? Don't know, actually. Maybe we should talk to them. Now we're talking about stakeholder analysis, okay? So even though we're talking about gaining competitive advantage in response, or a competitive response to a threat, your answer does not stand on its own. It overlaps with a huge number of other areas, and I've just given you 2 illustrations of those areas. And for that reason, with the SBL examination, it's really difficult to say, you will definitely get a question on strategy, or you'll definitely get a question on this, because of course you will. Because pretty much any topic will impinge on lots of other topics in SBL. Okay? So trying to question guess using the pre-scene is not a good idea. It's not a good idea. Having said that, if in the pre-scene you are given, for example, a chart, a board of directors chart, where you're told who the executives are and the non-executives and so on, then it's possible, I'd say more than possible, that in the real exam there'll be something on corporate governance, right? There'll be something on, this company's thinking of going public, and one of the things you'll say is, well, it needs the right corporate governance framework. It doesn't have enough executive directors. It doesn't have a risk committee or an internal audit committee or whatever it is. Okay, so that kind of indication is there, but it's not really trying to guess the question because it's not telling you anything new. Corporate governance is going to come up. Okay. Note the questions will not come from pre-scene information. More information provided in the exam paper will form the basis. Yeah, so the question won't be from the pre-scene. It'll be from the exhibits and the additional information given in the question. Okay? So don't spend too long on it, please. There's a link on the ACCA Global website, okay, which says all of this in much more detail. I invite you to have a look at that if you are not clear still. Okay, so how do we deal with the pre-scene, which we get 2 weeks before? Well, there's one suggestion that I have, one framework which I like, and that is basically, rather than just reading the pre-scene and making notes about it as you read through it, be a bit more active in understanding what's going on in the pre-scene, right? What's going on in the organization, what are the implications of various things, and so on. And to do that, I've decided to use the SWOT structure, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's something I would recommend that you try. It may not work for you, okay, because everyone is different in how they absorb information. But I think it's worth at least trying doing this. And I'll show you what I mean in just a second. And I would also strongly recommend that you don't do it on your own. Do it with a study buddy, do it with a group of study buddies, okay, where you analyze you do a SWOT analysis of the pre-scene, right? And you get together as a group and say, well, I think, this means this, or these are the implications. Maybe we should be thinking about these areas, okay? And really kind of actively embed the information into your minds and also the possible implications of that information into your minds, okay? Now, having said all of that, let me share what I mean as an example. So, there we go. Okay, so hopefully you should all be able to see that now. So I've just put together a simple Word document, as a SWOT table, all right, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And then underneath, I've got some other data, stuff which doesn't easily fit in to any of those. And what do I put in the SWOT? Well, let me just give you an illustration. So, for example, they tell us in the case study, in the pre-scene for specimen 1, that most bed mattress manufacturers in Zealand remain family-owned and none of them are listed. So I put that in as a strength. Why? Well, because if they do decide to go public, all right, if they do decide they need more money, for example, for expansion or whatever it is, then one of their options is to go public, okay? And I've also said, however, if they do decide to do that, then they'll need to change their governance, they'll need to change their culture a little bit because it's family-owned. All right, public companies need to have tighter governance issues. Give you another example. The fact that it's 100% family-owned, I've said, is also a weakness. Why? Because shareholder expectations are different. The family owns the shares, okay, and they are perhaps less demanding than a shareholder that is non-family, that is invested in the company because they want a return. Okay, and so they, in terms of the internal controls and so on, they may be a bit lax. That's a weakness. Okay, also with family-owned businesses, they tend to have long-term thinking. Why? Well, because they think about sustainability over generations of the business. So they make decisions which are long-term. For example, CapEx investments. With non-family owned companies, shareholders want a return every quarter, or every 6 months, or every year. And so the board of directors needs to focus on short-term thinking to satisfy the shareholders. Okay, so here's some examples, and I'm happy to share this with you. Actually, I'll be sharing one with you for the mock exam, which we will be reviewing on Monday. Okay, but that's something I want you to think about. I'd also like you to think about, or I'd like you to use what you've just learned on the pre-scene, which is available to you on the TestReach platform, on the pre-scene for the September mock exam, okay? And try practicing doing that. Do it with a friend or with a group. I'd strongly recommend it so that you're much better prepared for our webinar on Monday, okay? So here's really an explanation of why I recommend the the SWOT analysis. Okay, and they say, once you've done that, you'll find areas that are of strategic consequence for this particular organization will typically be the same: risk management, improved governance, etc. And you can have a look at past questions on those areas to kind of think about or remind yourself how those questions are asked and answered. Okay, so you've got 2 weeks in which to do this. It's a good amount of time if you use it properly. Now, big health warning: I am not saying that these topics will come up, right? Okay, I'm not saying that what you identify in the pre-scene analysis are going to come up. I'm not. Clear. Exhibits, much shorter than previous structure. Well, we've already spoken about that. Now, how do we deal with them? Well, what I would recommend with the exhibits is that you actually scan through them in the first 15 minutes that you have in the examination. All right? Because they're shorter, it's possible to do that. Highlight the key information in each exhibit. All right? Don't spend too long on them, and definitely don't start doing calculations. So if you get an exhibit with numbers in it, just ignore it. Ignore it. Why? Well, because if you start doing ratios, all right, you don't even know what the question is going to be, and therefore the ratios you're doing are probably not going to be relevant anyway. So don't do that until you get to the question that's asking you for some kind of analysis, and then you can do the analysis of the question that you think that would add value to your answer. Okay? So if you have an exhibit which has numbers, ignore it. Move to the next one. What else do you do in your 15 minutes planning time? For each task, highlight the key words and the additional information given in the task for that task and the task itself. So again, for this, I refer you to Exam Technique webinars, and there are lots of them on the Study Hub and on the ACCA website generally. And you will come across the highlighting process that I strongly recommend when analyzing the information in the SBL examination. Okay, what else do you do in the planning approach, in the planning stage? Link the task to the exhibits. As I've already said, you can very often link a particular task to a particular exhibit. Note the finishing time for your answer, really important. Remember, so generally, students will say, okay, well, I've got 20 minutes to answer this question. They'll write 20 minutes. Well, that's actually pretty useless in the exam. What I would suggest is the following. If you know that you've got 20 minutes to answer to write your answer, then rather than putting 20 minutes, write down 9:20. So the first question you answer, let's assume you start at 9 o'clock, you will finish it at 9:20. So write down 9:20. That way you don't have to calculate whether or not 20 minutes has gone by, right? You just know 9:20, you stop. It's really important that you write this down in your planning process, okay? And it's really, really important that you stick to that time. You must stick to that time, okay? Because students who pass are those who have had an attempt at the whole examination, not the ones who do brilliantly in tasks 1 and 2 and then don't leave enough time to do task 3. Those students very rarely pass. Okay, so don't do it. Note the number of points to be made. So this is part of your planning again. Okay, so if it's a 10-mark question, you'll make 5 points. Remember, 2 marks per point. Only 15 minutes to do this, so don't start thinking about what to say. Do this mechanically. Do it mechanically. Just write this information down, highlight information in the exhibits, but do it mechanically. Don't start thinking. You don't have time to think. And then after the 15 minutes, no matter how far you've got, start answering the question. All right. Okay, so attempting the tasks. Well, we can only see them one at a time. We know that. Get the format right. Really important. And again, Monday we'll talk more about this. In fact, we'll talk more about this whole area. Okay, but getting the report format or briefing paper format right is really important, because if you don't, you will lose professional skills marks, okay? And I'll explain more on Monday. End each section on time, it's a must do. For each point made, work on the basis of state, explain, apply. I've talked about that. The so what, and 2 marks or 3.5 minutes per point made. You can write quite a lot in 3.5 minutes, so use that time. Read the question, we've talked about that. Understand the question, think about what they're asking. They're not asking you to explain integrated reporting, they're asking you to tell them what the advantages are for company X. And then answer the question. Don't answer the question you would like to have been asked. Don't answer the question based on what you remember from last night. Answer the question based on what the examiner has asked. All right, it's better to write a half a page, okay, which is irrelevant, than 3 pages which is not, or which are not. Okay, so it's about quality, not quantity. So what do you do now? Well, between now and the exam, look at this video again. I know we've been through it quite quickly, but there we are. Find a group buddy or a study buddy. Analyze the pre-scenes. And I remind you, please do that for the mock this weekend. It's on the TestReach platform. Analyze it using the SWOT. All right, and I'll be running through that on Monday. Come along on the 14th, if you possibly can. Of course, it will be recorded if you definitely can't make it, but do try. And then attempt exam papers on the platform under strict time conditions. Now, remember, there are 3 exam papers in the new structure available to you. The mock exam is going to be available on the 14th as well. All right, on Monday. So you have lots of opportunity to do that. Print the script to PDF, self-mark, or even better, exchange with a buddy. It's really, really valuable. Okay, don't just read through the suggested solution and say, yeah, I would have said that, or, oh dear, I missed that point. You're not actually learning anything by doing it that way. Write the answer under time conditions. Swap your answers with a study buddy. Mark each other. Discuss what you did wrong. That's the way to learn. Okay, and then do it. Use what you've learned on the next exam. By the way, the real pre-scene is being released on the 22nd of August. Okay, so by the time that comes out, you need to be experts on how to analyze the pre-scene. As soon as that pre-scene comes out, 22nd, get together with your study buddies and start analyzing it. All right, ACCA Study Hub. Now, I've referred to this quite a lot. It's an absolutely brilliant resource for you. Lots of free resources, okay? Learning resources, study content, quizzes, revision questions, all sorts of stuff. So it's there, ladies and gentlemen. Please do use it. How do you access it? Well, go to my ACCA, my qualifications, and you'll see the tab there for the Study Hub. Okay, so go there, have a look. Right, it's all there. Take advantage. That would be my recommendation. I believe. There we go. Enjoy it.
Let's take a closer look inside Study Hub, your ultimate study resource. It's a digital hub. Study Hub gives you online access to study materials from ACCA. It works like an ebook with added interactivity. It's a knowledge hub. Study chapters help to increase your understanding. A visual overview shows all the topics in each chapter, so it's easy to see how they link up. It's a revision hub. End of chapter quizzes put your knowledge to the test. The multiple choice questions are automatically marked so you can review your performance. Flashcards test your knowledge of key definitions. Check your answer against the definition on the reverse of the card. Practice questions help you prepare for your exams. You can instantly compare your answers to the suggested solutions. It's an anywhere hub. Whenever and wherever you want to work, Study Hub is there on web and mobile. It's a success hub. 79% of students said Study Hub made them more confident. 90% said they would use Study Hub again. Use Study Hub to help boost your progression. Just go to your My ACCA account and click on the Study Hub link.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was a little introduction on Study Hub. Please make sure you use it. Okay, I've got loads of brilliant questions here in the Q&A, and I don't know which ones. I hope we can get through all of them, actually. Let me go through them as quickly as I can. So, specimen exam, you show us a whole task on EMAS. Are we expected to know international organizations? Great question. Now, the specimen exam talks about something called EMAS, right? But doesn't tell you anything else. It just tells you that this organization is expected to comply with EMAS standards. Now, you don't need to know about EMAS, right? But I think there's some things you can deduce. EMAS is about sustainability, about corporate social responsibility, etc. And what do we know about that? How do we make sure that that is embedded into our culture and our processes and our systems? Well, we set up a system to do that. We set some standards. We train people. We make people responsible for monitoring the achievement of those standards. We monitor if there have been any breaches of those standards, and we take corrective action. So if they're not asking about EMAS's specific requirements, they're actually asking about how do you make sure that your organization complies with a certain set of standards. In this case, they're using the example of EMAS, but it could be anything. It could be IFRS, for example. All right? But yeah, it's so again, you need to think back, step back from it and say, okay, well, they don't give us any more information on EMAS. So strategically speaking, what do we need to tell them? How do we comply with a set of external requirements, regulations? Like, how do we comply with corporate governance regulations when you go public, right? You set up an internal audit function. You make sure that your board of directors is balanced, et cetera, they have the right experience and the expertise, influence, and all of that. Can I use the pre-scene for syllabus area guess? Not a question yet. Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, basically the syllabus area guess is pretty much everything, right? Definitely, strategy, governance, risk, come up all the time. IT, again, more and more often. Ethics, corporate social responsibility, always, in one form or another. Okay, e-commerce, sometimes. Okay, so really, it's difficult to say that the pre-scene is going to give some indication of those areas. They'll all come up, they always do. If I need to use any framework in the question, is it necessary to provide a brief explanation on the framework? Absolutely not. Do not, I repeat, do not explain the framework. Do not. The board of directors doesn't care, remember. Okay? They want a solution to their real world problem. They don't care what's on page 57 of your textbook. How are we supposed to use a response option? So, for example, using the word processor for task 1A, we expect to use multiple response options for each subtask if needed. Well, so no. So, for example, if each part of the task requires the word processor, use the one word processor for that task, for all parts of that task. So you'll have one response option for all the parts of task number 1. Okay? Now you might have, in task number 1, you might have 1A, which uses the word processor, and 1B, which uses the slides. Well, fine, then you use both. Okay? Do you recommend to go through all the exhibits before reading the requirement, or read the particular exhibit with the requirement, meaning one requirement to one exhibit? I would suggest that you actually scan through the exhibits, find out what's there, what information is in there. Okay? While you're doing that, you might be able to link it to the questions. Yeah, it's quite easy to do. Okay, but just familiarize yourselves. Don't spend time, remember 15 minutes. I said, don't start thinking, okay, in these 15 minutes. Just know what's there, highlight some key information if you see it, link the exhibit to the task, analyze the keywords in the tasks, decide how many points you're going to make and what time you're going to finish. That's it. Don't start thinking, don't start analyzing at that stage. Okay, so there's quite a lot to do. Whether you do the exhibits first and then the task, or the other way around, doesn't really matter. It's entirely up to you. Resitting this September, so what should I do differently for preparing and practicing past paper? Because, well, there are 3 past papers available to you now, okay? There's the specimens 1 and 2, and there'll be the mock available from Monday. That's quite a lot to do in the next 3 weeks that we have left. And of course, you follow what we're going to be talking about on Monday and what we've been talking about today. Does the examiner expect more case study content and reference in the answer we gave because we've had access? Well, no, you use judgment, okay? So, for example, if there's some information in the pre-scene which you think is going to add value to your to the point that you're making, right? Then use that information from the pre-scene. If you don't, then don't use it. Okay, it's not the examiner is looking to see, well, how much of the answer includes information from the pre-scene. No, it's not like that. Okay, you might use the information from the pre-scene to justify your point or to put your point in context. But that's up to you. You don't have to have a minimum amount of information from the pre-scene in your answers. Is there any advice to students who have a few weeks left for the exam but haven't completed the course? Basically follow there's a huge amount of resources available, right? On the study hub, of course, for the course. But really in the 3 weeks that we have available, I would recommend strongly that you focus on these videos today and Monday and the 3 mock exams you have available on TestReach. Okay, don't start reading your textbook at this stage. Start application. Remember, you don't get marks for technical knowledge, you get marks for application. Reduction to 3, is there any advice how to better make use of the time available for allocation? Well, I've already spoken about allocation of time. I suffer from going blank when reading questions. How can I combat what was the best way to tackle a question? Well, going blank it's typically related to stress, right? So, but if you in the first 5 minutes, you start highlighting the keywords in the tasks, okay, that kind of calms you down a little bit, okay? You don't need to think about it. And then when you go to read the question again or the task again, when you start to answer it, you'll see the highlighted words and it'll remind you of what you were thinking, why those words were important. Factors or models for internal environmental analysis. This is not a teaching session, guys, I'm sorry. Good morning. Could you kindly advise which approach is better to make 1 point per mark, e.g. 10 mark or 2 marks per point, 5 for 10? Well, again, I remember what I said. If you look at the marking guide, okay, the examiner always says 1 mark for each point made, up to 2 marks for greater applications to the question, right? Up to 2 marks, right? That's typically what they say. So if you have a 10-mark question, yeah, you can make 10 1-mark points, sure, if you can think of 10 1-mark points, or you can make 5 2-mark points. I would recommend the second. That's what I would recommend, okay? Why? Well, because it's often difficult. Let's suppose you have a 20-mark point question. Difficult to think of 20 things to say. Much easier to think of 10 things to say and write enough to earn 2 marks for each. All right, I think that's the end of the Q&A. Richa, all yours.
Thank you, Ashim. And
Pleasure.
I believe students have found this useful. Today's session, which actually included a lot of information on the pre-scene. That's the upcoming change thing for which students are very curious. And we have also tried picking quite many a few questions and answering the questions from the background also. So before we close the session, I would like to say to the students that in regards to the debrief videos which we were discussing some time back, few minutes back, I mean. So these debrief videos are being launched on 14th August on YouTube. There are dedicated mock pages also for all the papers. So if you go to the study resource section, for SBL, you will find SBL mock and debrief page available there. And there only you will get an access to all the debrief videos which Ashim has been talking about, and also a link to go to the pre-September mock, for which pre-seen document has already been released for you in the CB practice platform also. And also you can access its PDF from the SBL mock and debrief video page. So that's the information for you. I have also added the link for these debrief video and mock into the attendee chats as well, and I've tried answering the questions also. So all the best to all of you, and do well, and prepare well for your exams. With this, I will say thank you to everyone. Thank you so much to Ashim for taking out time for us for this webinar. And thank you to the entire team who is supporting us from the back end to deliver the session successfully. And thank you to all the students for being here, listening to us, hearing the changes. And we hope that you are going to apply all these learnings and knowledge you gained from today's session. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you very much, Richa, and the team at ACCA, and to everyone that attended. I hope you got value. Goodbye.
Thank you.